Hello everyone. The paper I'm going to present you today is entitled Global Pandemic and EU Trade: Challenges and Perspectives. My name is Laura DİACONU MAXİM, and I'm professor at the Faculty of Economics and Business Administration, Alexandru Ioan Cuza, University of Iași, Romania. The structure of the paper: first of all, a brief introduction, afterwards literature background, presentation of data and the research methodology, then the results that I have obtained and the discussions based on the results regarding the evolution of trade in the EU states and some results of the econometric model, and in the end the conclusions. Analysts consider that the COVID pandemic is going to be one of the most serious global crises. Up to now, all the restrictions imposed to avoid the spread of the virus, from social distancing to total lockdown, had a large negative impact on the global economic activity. This evolution is explainable if we consider that the largest world manufacturers and exporters, China and United States, were the hardest hit by the pandemic. Factories closures in China, Europe and United States have led to a drop in the supply of the exportable goods and disruption in global value chains. All these conducted to a significant decrease in the global flow of goods and services, the World Trade Organization reporting a constant decline during 2020. The major concern is related to the fact that a supply shock generated by economic downturn of the largest manufacturers is likely to lead to a so-called supply chain contagion, meaning a domino effect in most nations, including those that are much less affected by the pandemic. A similar situation was noticed to occur during the 2008-2009 crisis, leading to a global great trade collapse. Even though there is a large number of studies that analyzed the evolution of trade under different types of uncertainty risks, there is a lack of scientific research that assesses the impact of a global economic, financial and humanitarian crisis on the international trade in general and on the European Union countries in particular. Therefore, the purpose of this study is to investigate the effects of the COVID-19 on trade by using monthly disaggregated trade data for the EU member states since the beginning of the pandemic. One of the biggest concerns related to the pandemic consequences on trade refers to the degree in which different types of products will be affected. On one hand, there are voices that say that, as it was the case of the trade collapse of 2009, the durable goods will be more impacted than non-durable ones, since the manufacturing sector is likely to get a triple hit. First, the supply disruption hinders the production that is concentrated in one of the hardest hit areas by a pandemic, East Asia. Secondly, the supply shocks will amplify as the less affected nations will find more expensive and difficult to acquire the necessary inputs from the hard-hit economies. To all these, it will add the demand disruptions caused by recessions and, implicitly, precautionary purchase delays by consumers and investors. If we consider that in the case of the manufacturing goods, China is the heart of the Asian factory and US is the heart of the North American factory, and these economies were the hardest hit by COVID-19, it is easy to explain why some analysts consider that the negative impact of COVID-19 on trade was greater for goods than for services. Actually, the analysts consider that the commodity exporting countries face double challenges, as terms of trade and export volumes deteriorate simultaneously along with countries' isolation. Moreover, even though trade in services was also negatively influenced by current health crisis, the pandemic encouraged the remote work and tele-intermediated interpersonal interactions, which was very easy to be implemented. On the other hand, there are voices arguing that the negative impact of COVID-19 on trade might be greater for services than for goods, since many services require the movement of the supplier or the customer. This occurs especially in tourism, that was the main contributor to the massive reduction in the trade with services. Therefore, the effects of COVID-19 in the tourism, hospitality and recreation sectors have been unprecedented. The travel and tourism sector suffered losses of almost $4.5 trillion in 2020, with 62 million jobs lost and with its global contribution to GDP declining by 49.1% compared to 2019. The most affected seem to be the developing states, especially from Eastern Europe. While the biggest percentage drops are recorded in transport services, recreational activities and accommodation, between 10 and 20% in 2020, the decrease in non-tourist service trade, comprising transport, finance, communication and business services, was much lower than that of tourism. Based on these findings, our research hypothesis is that at the European Union level, the negative impact of COVID-19 on trade was greater for goods than for services. One post-COVID global trade scenario foresees that countries will rely less on foreign suppliers for essential products, and in order to address future crises, countries will keep the production in countries that have a comparative advantage in these goods. This perspective might lead countries to trade efficiently for domestic reaction capacity, enhancing the domestic skills. Some analysts argue that firms could trade off cost efficiencies for supply chain shock resilience by keeping larger inventories, by closely monitoring supplier situation and diversifying the suppliers. Moreover, the firms might want to allocate their supply chains closer, since the labor cost differences between Asian states and the emerging and even developed countries has decreased, and in this way they could also save the transportation costs. The COVID era, which raised a concern for possible future emergence of new infectious diseases and advancement of digital transformations, increased the importance of the e-commerce for domestic and international transactions. Therefore, in the post-COVID period, the e-commerce can play a significant role to the growth of the global economy by enhancing globalization via expanded trade. In order to reach our purpose, we have used the data provided by Eurostat and World Bank for 28 member states of the European Union. The analyzed period was between 2011 and 2020. The reason for choosing this period is that 2011 is the first year after the 2008 crisis, in which the trade started to have a more consistent increase, and 2020 is the latest year in which the data is available on both databases. Apart from the data analysis and interpretation, our research methodology is also based on the development of the following econometric model. So, trade growth, which reflects bilateral annualized growth of trade from country I to partner country J in sector K at time t, is equal to alpha plus beta 1 exporter supply shock multiplied by sector characteristic plus beta 2 partner demand shock multiplied by sector characteristic plus omega. And here the explanatory variables include the supply shock in the exporting country and the demand shock in the partner country interacted with the relevant sector characteristic. The error term is omega. For this model, we used monthly bilateral trade data covering the period February 2020 to December 2021, collected from the COVID-19 Trade Watch. In order to assess the demand and supply shocks, we have used monthly information from the Google Mobility data from the COVID Global Community Reports. Our first findings refer to the evolution of trade in the 2008 states between 2011 and 2020, as it results from the analysis of the statistical data. Subsequently, we present some preliminary results obtained by implementing the sector-level model. According to the statistics, in 2020, the trade of the European Union members was severely impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, with significant declines in both exports and imports compared to 2019. As it results from this figure, the drops were the largest one from the entire period 2011-2020. After reaching a significant increase in 2011 and 2020, the export growth rate remained slightly positive until 2019, the only exception being in 2016, followed by a sharp decrease in 2020. The imports growth rates had two peaks during the period 2011-2020 in 2011 and 2017, followed by small fluctuations between 2012 and 2015, with negative values in 2013, 14 and 2016, and with a sharp decrease in 2020. A more detailed analysis of the 2020 year shows that the COVID-19 pandemic had the hardest negative impacts between April and October, both exports and imports registering 2 digits decline in growth rate. In the following month, the exports and the imports were consistently lower than in the same month in 2019. However, in December 2020, the exports were 2% higher than in December 2019. The relatively high figures from December 2020 might be related to an increase of the transactions due to the anticipation of the end of the Brexit transition period and the uncertainty of the trading relationship between the EU and the United Kingdom after that period. From the point of view of the evolution of the traded goods and services between 2011 and 2020, we can see a significant drop in both of them in 2020. As we can see in this figure, the decrease in the merchandise trade, 3.13%, was slightly higher than the drop in trade in services, 2.5%, registered between 2019 and 2020. However, we can notice that the trade in services had a positive trend between 2011 and 2019, while the trade in goods had upward and downward evolutions during the entire period, but the fluctuations were very small. At the EU level, in 2020, the highest decrease in trade with goods was observed in France, followed by Italy, Spain and Germany. In the case of trade with services, the largest drop was in Spain, followed by Italy, France and Germany. Based on these findings, we can say that our research hypothesis is confirmed. The results obtained after developing the econometric model are only preliminary ones. We intend to extend them more by adding other variables and by applying more tests. However, up to now, we found that there are sectorial characteristics such as possibility of the remote work, durability of the goods, and participation at global value chains played an important role in alleviating the COVID-19 effects on trade. As mentioned before, the results are only preliminary and more research is needed, but still, these findings can provide relevant policy recommendations. On one side, they contribute to identifying the sectoral attributes that create vulnerability during a pandemic, offering guidance for policy intervention. On the other side, they reflect how countries are impacted by domestic and foreign shocks during a global pandemic, which may be useful to identify possibilities to diversify the global value chain. As it results from the analysis of the statistical data, 2020 marked some of the largest reductions in trade and output volume since the post-war period. We can say that both exports and imports from and into the EU states were affected, but the 2020 reality showed that the imports flow were diminished more than the exports ones. Moreover, their recovery has also been slower. Another important result is that the trade in goods declined slightly more than the trade in services, but the first one's share in GDP is considerably higher than the percentage of the merchandise trade in GDP. Yet, in the case of the trade with services, 2020 was the first year from the entire period 2011-2020 in which a decline in trade with services was noticed. Another important finding is that the sectoral characteristics such as possibility of remote work, durability of goods and participation at global value chains played an important role in alleviating the COVID-19 effects on trade. As a policy recommendation, we could agree, based on our findings, that the resilience of the free trade paradigm in the post-COVID era should be an important option to consider. Thank you very much for your attention.